Hello again, and welcome to another edition of The Bleeding Cool's weekly book club. I'm Joseph Schmidt. My co-host Sam Morse couldn't make it this week because he works for Google and they have his claws in him. They sent him out to New York for a convention, so he's probably living it up right now. Hi, Sam, wherever you are. Joining with me this week is we have a couple returning guests. Who's going to be helping me with this week because Sam isn't here is Chase Magnett of comicbook.com. Say hi, Chase.
Hi, everyone.
And then returning with us this week, once again, is Ryan Burton. He was the first guest on our show, and he's back. He's the writer of Image Comics' Dark Engine. And if I'm correct, you used to write for CBR. Is that right?
Yeah, I still contribute once in a while, but it's sporadic at best. How do you like that word, Joseph?
I,
Sporadic.
I'll have to Google it when I get a chance. I think that's no. But then there's Danni Norris. Danni runs the comic shop that I go to every week, Dr. Fantasy's Comics and More in Glendale, Arizona. Her parents own the shop, and she keeps it in tip-top shape and makes sure all my books go in my pull list, or she steals them from someone else's. Hi, Danni. Okay, this week we are going to be discussing The Little Prince. This is Ryan's pick. It's an adaptation of a children's book, and man, I can't even pronounce this guy's name. I think it's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. How do you say that? Will someone who is familiar with French
I
school
think
me?
it's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Good
And
enough.
the way I got that was I was actually on YouTube the other day trying to figure out how to pronounce his name. It's not like I'm married to a French literature.
At least you did the diligent research, So,
Well, one of us has to be professional, Joseph.
and one of us has to be the lush. I'm glad we know our roles. We're reading the adaptation of it by Joann Sfar. I think that's how you pronounce his name, but I probably butchered that one too. But yeah, so this one came out through, I think it was Houghton, yeah, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. So this is made in 2008, and it's a really it's a strong adaptation, I thought. With and I say that with being an asshole who hasn't read the original children's book, but it wasn't lost on me. I really enjoyed this book immensely. So Ryan, thank you for picking it. And
I'm glad you.
before we get into this book, I'm gonna go through a brief interview with you guys and find out what you're all up to. So first, Chase, why don't you tell us about what you're working on right now? I know you were telling me it's pretty interesting.
Right now, I'm working a lot at comicbook.com, doing reviews, columns, commentary, and the like, and a little bit of Comics Bulletin as well. Here in Omaha, with Legend Nebraska, Legend Comics and Coffee, we're developing what'll hopefully become an annual comic convention. End of May, very last weekend, the one after Memorial Day, will be O Comic Con, May 29th through the 31st. And we've just got a few of our first comic guests signed on, and we're talking to some others that I'm hopeful to that will attend, and hoping to build a nice small to mid-sized convention that's focused on comics and art.
Cool. So are you guys kind of shying away from some of the sci-fi and horror film stars and TV, the genre fiction?
There's going to be a little bit of that. The gentleman who's running it also runs NebraskaCon, which is a decade-old anime convention, and so there's some voice actors involved. But for the most part, we're trying to focus it on small projects and comics.
Awesome. There aren't enough, purely focused comic conventions, I feel like, out there. So, any help you need with getting it together, if I can help out, I'd love to.
Yeah, and it's really an open invitation. The one nice thing when they brought me on board is sort of I'm not employed by them. I'm sort of just a consultant since I'm friends with publicists and the like to hopefully try to put them in touch with people. Is that it's pretty much an open invitation to anyone who makes comics to come and enjoy Omaha for the weekend. They're providing hotels at the Hilton, transportation, and are trying to make it so that at the bare minimum, any creator who comes has a table and a hotel provided for them, and potentially some help with travel. So.
Awesome. And that's May next year.
Yep.
Awesome. Sounds like a rip roaring good time. So, Danny, you work for Dr. Fantasies, Comics and More. You guys are approaching a milestone. How long have you been open?
We have just been open actually a little bit past 3 years. We fancy that.
I feel like I've been going to you guys for a lot longer. So what is it like? What are your experiences like working at that shop? I know your family opened it and you've been running it pretty much every day ever since. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
It's a lot of fun. I mean, of course it's still retail, so you still get that aspect of it, but then also it's very family oriented. So, I mean, when I'm sick, my favorite customer will bring me homemade soup, and so it's like you get to know the people and you kind of build relationships and, I mean, almost fall in love with the lifestyle. I'm very lucky to have it.
So since you get to pretty much read everything that comes out every week, what are your favorite books that you like right now?
Saga is my very favorite right now. And then Rat Queen trails closely behind it.
I haven't picked that up yet. And I know you've been telling me to read that.
I'll bring you the graphic novel. It's so good.
I'll trade you Copra for that next time I come by the store.
Yeah.
And then Ryan, I just noticed that the solicitations for January came out, and we got to wait till January to read Dark Engine 5. I'm excited to pick that up. I'm so excited that you're continuing with it. Want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Issue 4 comes out at the end of November. It's the last week in November. And John Bivens, the artist, and Kelly Fitzpatrick, the colorist, they knocked it out of the park. It's pretty incredible what they did. I'll send each of you, if you could provide me everyone's email after this, Joe, I'll send everybody one of the double-page spreads that nobody's seen that is just absolutely phenomenal. So that comes out at the end of this month, and that wraps up our first arc. And the first trade comes out in December, right before Christmas. And then issue 5 starts a new arc, and that's at the end of January. And it kind of follows a new protagonist, a black swordsman named the Ink-Face Ranger, who, he's kind of like your Aragorn / Mad Max. He's just this incredible badass who is dressed like an extra from the Brotherhood of the Wolf. It's just a lot of fun.
So for everyone that's not familiar with Dark Engine, it's a story that takes place over a few different periods of times, but it has its roots set in the future. I remember when we first discussed it, you were kind of saying how you wanted to go for this otherworldly feel where you don't really understand what's going on the first time you read it, and then kind of pick it up into it. When you get into it, you'll pick up the threads. So how has the reception been to the first 3 issues?
Well, actually, the reviews have gotten better with each issue. David, I forget his last name, Desanyake or
Desanyake. Yeah.
He actually did a really lovely write-up on Bleeding Cool about the book, and Comic Bastards did a nice write-up. Recently, we had a really lovely interview with Sarah over at Women Write About Comics. And women have really resonated with the comic book because we have this really strong, unstoppable female protagonist that's just a survivalist. It's kind of incredible. So to answer your question a little bit more directly, Joe, with each issue, the reviews are becoming more and more positive, but I'm trying to distance myself from reviews because a good one can be just as damaging as a bad one.
I see your point. And you're talking about your main character, Sim,
Yeah.
and I really enjoy the comic because she goes through these graphic rebirths and becomes, she just her like it seems like she's just getting an inch closer to her mission every time she busts out of some like animal carcass, or not even a carcass, but like some poor hapless animal that's going about its day. Or,
Well,
she like
in issue 4, her path comes to an end in one sense, and starts anew in a different sense. It's really pretty great. And with each travel, there's a layer added to her characterization, which was the plan from the beginning. So you go back and you read issue 1, and all of a sudden, well, issue 3 ties back to that, and people are picking up on it, and it's lovely. I was actually in my LCS today, Bedrock City Comics here in Houston, and they said that the sales are better for issue 3, and people are going back for issue 2, which is awesome.
that's really cool. So, is there anything else that you're working on other than Dark Engine?
I actually just pitched something yesterday. I haven't heard anything back. It's not even been 24 hours. But again, if you provide me everybody's contact information, I'll be more than happy to share it with you all off record.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, yeah, of
Yeah, I'd
course.
love to hear about it.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, so now we're gonna talk about The Little Prince, and Ryan, why did you pick this book?
I picked it because there was a line from the book. It's kind of morbid, but when Robin Williams killed himself, his daughter went on Twitter and quoted a line. It's something like, "You and you alone will have the stars that sing," or I'm butchering the line, but I thought it was so beautiful that I threw that into Google search, and up comes The Little Prince. And so I picked up the children's book first, read it, fell in love with it. It was the first time I'd ever heard of it, but of course I found out about it in a very, very strange manner. And I was dicking around on Amazon, seeing what other type of iteration this book had out, and I saw the one by Joann Sfar, and I ordered that immediately, even though I had just read the children's book. And I think I enjoyed it more than the original piece. There is not one complaint I have about the book, quite frankly. It is absolutely masterful, and it's one of those very, very special books that you want to tell everybody about because you enjoyed it so much. Some people do that with Miller's Dark Knight Returns, others do that with Morse, Watchmen, et cetera, et cetera. This is definitely one of my top 5 books that I would recommend to anybody in a cocaine heartbeat.
For our listeners that haven't done cocaine, that's pretty fast. But stay away from that.
Yeah, cocaine.
Unless you're doing it on copies of The Little Prince, then it'll probably be a lot better.
Or and this is what I point the book, or on copies of Dark Engine.
Or
Cocaine on copies of Dark Engine.
just don't rip out pages to make your Coke straw.
But all levity aside, I would recommend it in a heartbeat. It's a beautiful, beautiful book.
Yeah, it's not the typical graphic novel. It is more of a children's book, especially even the graphic novel adaptation. But it is probably one of the better comics that I've read this whole year.
Right, dude? That in 08. I was thinking, where the hell was I in 08? Why didn't I hear about this?
And it's kind of funny. What kind of brings me to my next question is I had really only just passing knowledge that it was this really seminal children's book, that it was this highly regarded story that came from France, right around the time of World War II, or right after that, and it was something that my parents never brought up to me it was something that I had heard friends reference this book as being one of their, their favorite children's stories, books that really resonated with them as children. And I just, for some reason, it never dawned on me to even check it out until you suggested reading it. Danny, you said that you read it when you were a kid, the original version. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think it was fourth grade. I read The Little Prince.
Okay.
For me, but I remember reading one book that teach.
You're kind of cutting out, Danny. No, it's you maybe try again. Let's try again. You were cutting out a little bit. Why don't you just say what you just said one more time?
When I was in fourth grade, everyone was required to read it. It was one of those things that all the kids in class had to do a book report on, and then no project to share it with the class.
Yeah.
And what was your impression as a kid?
I don't remember a whole lot. I remember that even though the teachers picked it, I still enjoyed it. Because when you're a kid, you want to pick Captain Underpants every day.
Yeah.
But it was still good.
Okay. And Chase, were you familiar with this story before we read it?
My first exposure to The Little Prince, I want to say, was in high school during a philosophy club that I was in, and I found that I really enjoyed it then. But it's also one of those stories that, although we typically classify it as a children's book, has become, I think, more potent as I've grown older. I was rereading it at Legend on Monday, first the book and then the comic, and there are parts of it where I started to tear up, and I was like, damn it, I can't do this, I'm in public, and it never affected me that way when I was younger. I think there's a lot to it that you can't really appreciate until you've gone through certain life experiences.
Yeah, do you think that's one of the strengths of the book, that it's something that as a kid you read it and maybe glean some insight into how mundane adult life feels, and then reading it as an adult, all the philosophical musings that it has on the way we interact and the way we kind of take ownership of these relationships. I mean, what do you think of that?
I think there's a lot of ways to engage with it, which is probably the reason that it's become sort of a cultural classic both in and outside of France. Because as a kid, you said there's these little parables, and you look at the king and you try to explain it and make sense. But I think there's a deeper emotional level to it. The main story to me is the romance between the little prince and the flower, and that's the part that appeals to me the most. And I don't think that's something that most 10-year-olds are going to focus on. So I think there's a lot of different ways to read it and to focus it, and that it's a bit of a puzzle box of a book in that regard.
Well, to Chase's point, he leaves his asteroid because of the rose, and at the very end, he goes back to the asteroid because he yearns for the rose. So one could argue that the entire story focuses on your want for that one person and the trials and tribulations you're willing to go through for that one person.
It's pretty poignant stuff. And I mean, in its subtlety, and I mean, it's for as on the nose as it is, it's very subtle, and it at least lays that foundation there that you don't really know what you have until you don't have it anymore, which is something that resonates in everything and everyone. I mean, for me, it was the point that really got to me was when he finally goes and sees the fox, and the fox, who's very timid around him at first, but then tells him, let's hang out. But if you want to tame me, you have to be patient with me. And I really thought that was an interesting parallel between, taking ownership of an animal and having a relationship with a human. Uh, did that resonate with any of you?
Yeah, I think the part of that really resonates with me, and one thing I focus a lot about when I read comics and write about comics is the concept of empathy. And what the fox does is it basically acts as a teacher for him, because he meets the fox right after he's seen all these other roses and goes, "Oh, mine wasn't special." And the fox essentially teaches him how wrong he was and shows him that what's special isn't what something is, but what something is to you and what you earn with someone over time. And that in coming to understand another person, you create something that makes them entirely your own and makes you responsible to them. And that's what I really found fascinating. I think that's why it's an important book for kids, is because it teaches empathy, but it's also significant for adults because it points out how often we forget the importance of that concept.
The importance of what we have, basically.
Yeah. And is that? I mean, do you think that that's what the pilot was lacking, and that's kind of why he was stranded? I mean, there are a few different interpretations I feel one can have with this. But what did you guys think of the pilot and his relationship with the Little Prince?
I thought the pilot was. There's two ways I go about it. Actually, no. There's just one way. The pilot is stranded in the desert. He's dying and he's hallucinating. And before he dies, he sees this prince, and this prince reminds him of what was important in life. The way I interpret it.
Okay. What about you, Danny? What did you think of the?
For a while, I thought that he was the Little Prince. Like, for a while, I kind of thought maybe it was something that he had when he was younger, and then, like you said, he kind of lost that thought and that feeling of, well, I have to appreciate what I have now. Because I think as people grow older, that's hard for a lot of people to remember. I'm this greatest thing, but I have this, and this me is special. I thought that maybe it was younger pilot coming back to remind him. I don't know if that's correct or anything, but that's kind of my interpretation of what it might have been.
I don't think there's really any correct. It's just, there's no correct way to read it. I mean, I really enjoyed the end sequence, and that kind of was one of the most baffling parts to me. And hi, Mrs. Burton.
Hello.
But I really enjoyed that aspect of the relationship where he's kind of learning from the Little Prince as he's going along, and through his interactions with all the different people, how he kind of like teaches them all these different archetypes of what an adult is supposed to be, and then who he is, and it seems like the pilot is even struggling himself to fit one of those roles, the people on the little planet. What did you think about that, Ryan?
About what?
About the people on their own planets, the different adults and their different professions or different jobs that they had or different.
I really like the point that you brought up, Joe, about the pilot trying to figure out what archetype he was or where he fit. It's one of those things. I was thinking about the answer I gave earlier about how I interpret the pilot and the boy's relationship. And there's a lot of fun trying to figure out, what type of angle this book is trying to play or what type of theme. But there's also a lot of fun in just reading it and mulling it over for a while and not really coming to some concrete conclusion, right? So when you ask me this question about what I think, my knee-jerk reaction is to tell you that, well, this the king or the businessman is one type of adult, or the drunkard is one type of adult that you can grow up to be, and if you're not careful, that's who you will be, and that's how you will be defined by everyone else, and you will have your own little planet to be the businessman on, or to be the king of, or et cetera, right? I think at one angle, it is a laundry list. It is, here are the different types of, let's say, dead-end archetypes that you can be, right? On the other side, I just like the idea of the prince, on the surface level, the prince just going from planet to planet, seeing these different types of assholes on these different types of planets, and saying, this isn't for me. I want to be a kid. I want to continue on. I want to go through this journey of life and get back to the rose eventually. So I'm afraid I don't have a concrete answer to a lot of this, because it's, I don't know, it's just like Chase said, it's a really poignant piece of work, and it resonates so much, at least with me, because there's different ways to interpret it, and if I start to interpret it too much, it sort of loses that charm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there. One of the things that actually had me thinking of was Bill Watterson. We discusses Calvin and Hobbes, and he constantly gets the question, well, was Hobbes imaginary or was he real? And every time his response is, you're missing the point. And I think that I interpret their relationship as two characters very similarly, in that it doesn't necessarily matter if you focus too much on, oh, is this really a magical world where the little prince fell down from a comet, or is it one where this is a hallucination? If you become too focused on interpreting it through a certain lens, you lose the ability to see levels and to find different meanings in it. And I think it's important that the Little Prince could be real or could be imaginary, and that it isn't defined.
Right. And when you start to piggyback on what Chase says, when you start to compartmentalize different aspects of this book, or any type of masterpiece like this, you start to dissect it and put them in different categories, it just loses its strength. It loses that emotion, that empathy, as Chase pointed out.
It seems like the settings are very grounded. I mean, it right off the bat, the story. Let me preface this. Right off the bat, the story throws surreal images at you, and it tells, it kind of, you're dropped in the middle of the desert and you're stranded with this pilot, but it immediately, the kid is talking about where he comes from, his own planet, where it only has 3 volcanoes, and planets being very small, and it kind of just jumps into him exploring and wondering if it seems like that beginning part where the pilot pulls out the star map and tries to figure out where this kid comes from, and he starts naming asteroids and things like that. It seems like logic trying to make sense out of the artistic or the surreal, and at least it kind of does it. I mean, it seems like a tongue-in-cheek way for the creators of the story to kind of just say, don't worry about all the literal aspects that are in this story. Just go with it. Just go with the flow, and we'll get you there. And at the end, the artist, or not the artist, but the pilot, he kind of comes full circle again, and he pleads with us as readers, kind of saying, if you are stranded in that desert in Africa and you run into a little boy that doesn't answer your questions, come tell me. What do you think he was saying with that last line? That was the one that really kind of just stuck out to me, and it grabbed me. Chase,
let me go grab my copy. I'll be right back. Okay.
But Chase, what did you think about that part of the story?
Oh man, and in the book it's interesting because this is almost that final page, because there's a break in the comic where there's 6 panels with no words, and then you have that reverie that he goes through sleeping underneath the plane, and that's actually almost an afterword in the comic, or sorry, in the book, because the book is written from a first-person perspective, almost like he's trying to tell a story. It's written as if this is something that really happened. So it reads a little bit differently in the comic, I think. But I think it speaks to what the Little Prince represents and how ephemeral that concept is, and how difficult it is to find it. Because the Little Prince is a couple things. One, it's a childhood sense of joy and imagination, the ability to live and really experience life, but it's also the fact that over the course of his week in Africa, he tamed the Little Prince and became responsible for him. That he fell in love with this other person and formed a unique bond, and misses that person. And that a lot of this book comes down to, and I think the Little Prince's conclusion earlier on comes down to longing for another human being that you don't have anymore, and that although you have memories, losing that relationship and that person can change you for life, and maybe not always for the better.
Chase said the operative word, and that is relationships. You know, flipping through this book and hearing what you all have been saying, this book is nothing but focusing on different types of relationships. What type of person you want to be, and what type of relationship you want to have with others.
So then what is the rose? Is the rose that idealized companionship that you would find in a spouse or a partner, or is it something else?
It could be just as full of a friendship. I mean, everybody has that human quality where they want to be loved, they want to fit in, they want to have someone to talk to. You know, I don't necessarily think it has to be a romantic relationship. It could just be, you know, you need someone, and so does she.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I don't think the rose is idealized. I think Danny nails this in the fact that the rose is simply someone that you love and care for, because he goes out of his way to show that she's flawed, that she's vain, that she can be spiteful, but ultimately that stuff doesn't matter because it was worth the work. And there's that line that I think haunts me a little bit. I was too young to know how to love her, that although she was flawed, she was important.
Yeah, that's the most adult line I feel like in the entire book, and it's coming from this little kid talking about a rose in space. It hit me so hard when he said that. I mean, I think everyone's been in a relationship like that, whether even Danny said, it doesn't have to be romantic, where you just are too young to realize what you do have. And that was like one of the most beautiful lines of the book, I thought.
Jesus, man, I go through that every week. When you think about old friends and people you haven't kept in touch with, I mean, I'm a broken record, but that's why this story resonates so well.
Yeah, it feels like it transcends a lot of the certain tropes that you find in stories nowadays, and how they kind of treat relationships between friends and lovers for granted. They kind of give you the stock parameters of how characters interact with each other, and whether it's an inside joke or sharing affection. It's not genuine. It felt like his relationship with the rose was because the prince being this creature of naivety and wonder and majesty, and is so enamored with the beauty of this rose and what is contained inside of it, and the rose is just kind of but as soon as he sees the rose, he kind of sees her as something that he isn't sure if this is something that he wants. And it just felt so real and so human that in any relationship, I mean, if we're gonna get a little personal about it, I had a friend for a long time that I ended up living with me and my wife for a couple years, and things turned out sour just over things like bills and objects, and it just turned it turned us against each other, and it soured us. And I mean, years later, we've matured more. But I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking with this that's what resonated with me when I read these lines specifically. It's like these are moments where your experiences and your emotions tend to shape how you respond, and it's only with reflection that you kind of realize the mistakes that you make. It just felt so human to me.
digging into that a little bit more, one thing, the baobab trees, is that, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but there's a consistent theme of maintenance, of him raking out the volcanoes, of him having to pull up the baobabs, of him having to put the glass over her at night, that he has to maintain this planet and put so much work into it in order to keep it going. So when he leaves, I think the story implies that when he leaves, he can't go back because he's no longer there to maintain it. So the planet won't be there for him to return to. So that it's a lot of work to make it possible to have these sorts of relationships, that you have to be willing to put it in and put it in every day, but also that you can't always fix it once it's gone.
That's very true. That didn't even dawn on me until you mentioned that. That's very true. So now I want to get into the artwork aspect. We've been kind of talking about the story for a while now, and we haven't really talked about Joann Sfar's adaptation of it. And I really thought that the artwork was surreal. I thought that the simple color scheme, the really kind of rugged characters that were really more reminiscent of something you'd find in a children's book than in any sort of comic storytelling. But it just was something to me that really felt like it fit the story extremely well. It felt like it was something that really took you into what can only be described as an imagination. And that first scene where it introduces the baobab trees, it was so mind-boggling, where he's kind of being swallowed up by the limbs of this tree, which is like kind of a version of himself. It seems like it just, and what he says to the pilot there about what specifically he says something about how they can get you. Where is it? Sorry, guys. Oh yeah, he says. The pilot says, "Look around here. Nothing grows here." And he says, "No, not here. No, but where I come from, it's different." And and then he starts talking about the sheep. It just seems like another strange aspect that he throws in there for a reason, and I can't quite put my finger on it. What did you guys think about that?
I think that's the double play on him being a child. So he is balancing this book as one big philosophical meaning, right? But the trick that the original author and Joann Sfar are doing is balancing it out, or rather painting that philosophical vibe over with a very childlike aspect, whether it's the character designs, the kid with the very big eyes, and saying stuff like, well, at least we don't have sheeps on our asteroids or something like that. I haven't read the book in about 3-4 months, but there's that lovely play, that lovely dynamic where in the same line on the same page it can be very heady stuff, but it's counterbalanced by some sort of whimsical chatter.
What did you think of the visualizations of the baobab trees?
I really didn't give those much thought. I was more drawn to the character design and the color palette. I fell in love with the color palette, with how simple it was. The rose is not colored red. It's colored pale yellow, so it's kind of to Danny's point. You give yellow roses to friends. It's a friendship rose. It's not a red rose. So that could denote that anybody could indeed be that rose, since it's yellow. The character designs were absolutely phenomenal, and I think that shows the majesty of the creative team behind this adaptation. I think it's the businessman who is dressed like a cosmonaut. And
in his weird spaceship, his lost in space station.
Yeah. It's not even a planet, right? It's like a mechanoid. And then you have the king with like a snuffleupagus nose, which is brilliant. And then you can go on, and I think it's gorgeous. that's what really drew me in. I wasn't focused on that one interpretation, Joe. I was focused more on the rest of the characters. And you know, I kind of want to own the fox that they designed with his lovely long ears and his tail. I want that fox.
Yeah, that was a freaky fox.
It's kind of like the lion cat, you know? You see these comic book animals and you're like, yeah, I want the lion cat, or I want the fox that Joann Sfar drew.
Love that. That to me was, I want them to be that long.
You're kind of cutting out there, Danny. You want to try it again?
I said that I loved that the fox's ears were as long as his tail.
Yeah.
Fox, that's exactly how I would want the fox to look like.
Yeah,
So-
it's a child's version of a fox, right? Like really, really cute, and they wrestle around in one panel when the fox shows adoration for the boy, the prince. It shows this ultimate version of what it would be like for a child wishing that he had a fox as a friend.
And one thing I really like about that style of artwork in conjunction with this being an adaptation is that in the original book, The Little Prince, there is artwork that's supposed to work in conjunction with the words on the page, and it's all being drawn from the perspective of the pilot. And the artwork's very, very childish in nature. It's very, it's not realistic by any means. It's sort of fantastical, surreal, like we've spoken about with this artwork. And so I think adapting it to a comic and keeping it so that it's told from the pilot's perspective makes it feel, I think what Sfar is going for is that this is supposed to be the pilot's attempt to tell the story in the same way that in the book he continually reiterates that he's telling it to the best of his ability. Here he's telling it to the best of his ability, and so we get these exaggerated forms that reveal the pilot is the one narrating, but also show that his art and his attempt to tell the story is a connection for his, I don't want to say inner little prince, that sounds sort of cliched, but I think you get what I'm going for there, and that it's his sort of childlike joy that he's getting to tell this story.
Danny, you're one of the most picky people I know when it comes to artwork and comics. What did you think about this about this book and the artwork in it?
Well, I wasn't sure about it. And then I got to when they were talking about how he drew an elephant, a python that had swallowed an elephant, and no, a boat, and it kind of reminded me like you can't judge it just solely on art. And the farther I went on, the more I enjoyed it, and the more I did it that way. I will say, though, there is one page specifically that bothers me, and not that it's bad, it's more, if you look at page 8.
I'm sorry, it's more what?
It's more of, I just want to know why there. Like, if you look at page 8, and if you look at the moon, you can kind of see what I'm talking about, maybe.
Page 8 in the moon?
Yeah.
Oh, with the human shape in the moon?
Yeah, there's like a human shape going across the moon.
It might be a cloud.
I just wanted to know why it was there. I mean...
I noticed that, and I thought it was charming. The reason I say that is I think they put it in there because when children look at the sky, even when we look at the sky, sometimes we imagine things. And I think it's just a double play on not taking this book too literally. This is on one level a children's story. So I think that was like a visual kind of Easter egg from the creative team. I think they were just given. I know that and I'm butchering the last name, but the Exupéry estate, they actually went to Joann Sfar and commissioned him to do this book, if that's the right word. And they basically approached him. They said, "We want this guy to adapt The Little Prince."
That's interesting, because
Yeah.
it doesn't seem. It seems perfect with his art style, to be honest. From all the images that Chase was talking about that are on the pages for the actual book, and
Like
then
I
you look at the art style.
I didn't even notice it the first time I read it. Just looking through it a little bit more, I'm kind of curious as to what, but that does make sense that sometimes maybe we see the moon. And when my sisters were younger, they would say, oh, the sun went to sleep, so now the moon's awake now. And it kind of gives that human-like quality.
Is that a man in the moon, perhaps? Is that what that's supposed to be?
That's kind of what I saw when I first
That's
saw
how
it.
I read it.
I think they're just having fun with it. They're just saying, well.
One thing I like about Sfar adapting it to comics as well is that he uses art in order to draw out things that aren't quite there in the book. For example, you have the opening scene, and although he talks of a boa constrictor, in the book, the connection to the snake at the end and drawing that full circle isn't as well drawn out. Here we get the initial scene in the smoke of a cigarette, which obviously has some connotations and connections with death and mortality, is drawn out and made into a snake. And on the fourth panel of the book, it's threatening to engulf his head. And so the danger of the snake is presented really early on, and it resurfaces about 20 pages in. And so there's some really potent foreshadowing that doesn't exist in the book, but that Sfar draws out and makes a more prominent part of his adaptation.
That's interesting. It seems like they chose a great artist to adapt this works. So Ryan, as far as what you know, are you saying that Joann Sfar didn't really have any intention of doing this book until it wasn't a project that he was on his radar?
I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on the history of this adaptation. I had just read or heard that the state approached him. That so he's very big in France. Joann Sfar is, right? I think he's done directed a movie or two, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And I know he did The Rabbi's Cat, and I think he did some other books with First Second. So he's extremely prolific. And I had read or heard that the estate commissioned him or approached him to do this. When they were given the idea, or they came up with the idea of turning The Little Prince into a graphic novel, I think his name was at the top of the list, and he was approached.
Interesting. Well, because looking at his other artwork and then the style of art in the book, it seems like a perfect fit.
Well, another thing that I read, which I found really interesting, and I had to flip through the book, is with the original novel, as Chase pointed out, you have different drawings, and it's the pilot's interpretation of what's going on. I think it was a New York Times book review of when this graphic novel came out, or it was some review, but they had mentioned that the original illustrations by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry everything was very iconic. The prince was drawn as an icon, as an ideal of what this prince should look like. And with Joann Sfar's, this boy is, he looks like a little boy. His hair's messy. I think he even has like ruddy cheeks here and there, and you don't really get that with that first interpretation. So I think they knew what they were getting. To your point, Joe, they knew what they were getting when they asked Sfar to do this, or when he did adapt this book, that it was going to be totally reinterpreted. It wasn't going to be this ideal, this icon. It's not going to look like a rose. For God's sakes, he made a rose look like a woman with, long, beautiful eyelashes that were her petals. It wasn't the rose that the original author came up with, or drew, rather.
So it seems like
chose wisely.
Yeah, it's definitely the strength of the book. I feel like, other than the themes that it raises, the questions that you ask yourself when you're done reading it, the lines of dialogue that you can lift and put right on your tombstone, you know. I mean, it just, the visuals are so striking and so they're so surreal that I feel like it's not that it does the story justice. It's like I couldn't imagine it looking any different than it does. This is the version for me that probably goes a long way because it's the first version of this story that I've come into contact with. But when I tell my son this story, when we crack this open when he's a little bit older to kind of understand it, this is the version of it. I hope that it becomes his version as well.
Look at exactly. If you guys have your book in front of you, look at page 28, and I'd like to know on page 28 what that scene does for you. I mean, it's very simple, but I'm curious how that resonates with you.
I'd like for everyone else to answer first because I read the book and this back to back. And I kind of regret that because I was interested to see how I would have responded to the scene without having read the scene as it's very clearly explained in prose.
Yes.
Why don't you go into that? What are some of the key differences or key takeaways?
Is that a question for Chase?
Oh yeah, Chase. What?
The
differences between
in prose, he asked this question: "Were you feeling sad?" Because he brings up the story of seeing the 44 sunsets and how that makes you happy, and so he says, "Were you sad?" And then he doesn't respond. Here we really get to let that breathe, and there's some poignancy to the moment. In most of Safar's panels, you have some sort of dialogue or narration occurring. And so letting that moment sit for 4 panels as they sit together and watch the sunset allows it to really breathe. So I think he adapts it well because in prose, what occurs is he says he didn't say anything, and he basically just says, so you could tell he was really sad even though he didn't say anything. And I think it actually works better in Safar's work.
Absolutely.
Because it makes you stop and it makes you pause and it makes you focus on this little boy looking back at him when he asked the question and then refusing to respond and watching the sunset instead. And the maturity of the pilot just being willing to let it go and recognizing what that means. They both look at each other in panels 3 and 5, but they're never actually making eye contact. So they're both recognizing what the other person's feeling without making that known vocally. So I think it's a very well adapted page, and it's one that reads very differently because it's much more subtle.
Do you feel like this story, Chase, has, do you feel like it has more of an impact with the visuals, or do you think that the prose is where the strength lies?
I wouldn't be inclined to say that either is necessarily better. I think Sfar brings out certain things better, but then there are certain things the book does. The very, very opening where he's talking about drawing, and you have these little silly illustrations of a boa constrictor eating an elephant juxtaposed to his prose, and it feels like somebody's diary you're reading, and I think that works a little bit better for the book. I think the reason this works so well is Sfar doesn't try to become a slave to the original text, even though that text is so well loved. It's that he recognizes that he's adapting it to a new medium and tries to draw out the best parts of it that work better in comics and make it into a comic as opposed to just slapping it directly onto a page and applying pictures.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, guys, we're almost hitting the hour mark, so it seems like a good time to wrap this up with some final thoughts. Danni, why don't you start off with and tell us, kind of summarize your feelings and tell us, just, do that thing you do. Just.
Well, I really loved it. For me, especially with all the changes that's going on in my life right now, I'm going away to college. I've got 2 jobs. It's very almost an adult life, even though I don't want to say that. And it kind of made me stop and think like, whoa, don't grow up too fast, because you don't want to grow up. And so I think that a lot of the time becoming a lot of magic behind, and I think the book kind of says, don't leave your magic behind, and always know that the drawing is a boa constrictor with an elephant in it. So, that's what I like.
That's a good point. Or a box with a sheep in it. One of those two. All right, and Chase, what about you? What are your takeaways from this?
I'm really glad we picked this book because it got me to come back to the story and realize how much I love the story. I think my favorite thing about reading it as a comic is recognizing that an adaptation doesn't always have to be a direct one-to-one adaptation. It reminds me of Mazzucchelli's adaptation of Paul Auster's City of Glass, which is another beautifully adapted comic book that makes the most of a story and then transforms it into a comic so that it's potent but in very, very different ways. And I think Sfar is a really remarkable cartoonist who shows us that comics have their own strengths and things that they're capable of doing that no other medium can, and that it's worth, even for people who have read The Little Princess prose, coming and addressing Sfar's comic and seeing what they get from it.
Awesome. And Ryan, how about you?
This is definitely going to be a book I read at least once a year, once every other year. I was dicking around on the internet the other day, and I was looking at crazy tattoos, and I started typing in the Little Prince tattoos for one reason or another, and I saw this really cool one, and I thought it summed up the book rather well. And on the inside of one arm, it had the boa constrictor eating an elephant, and it looked like the hat, right? And on the other arm had the X-ray of the same thing, and it showed, indeed, it wasn't a hat, it was a boa constrictor eating an elephant. And I think that summarizes the book rather well, that you can either take it very literal, or you can kind of lose yourself in the imagery and lose yourself in all the different messages that it presents. So I think it's very beautiful from top to bottom. The adaptation that Sfar does, the original work by the author, and it's a very fine book, and it's something that I would recommend to anybody, young or old, quite frankly.
Awesome. Chase, you kind of touched up on one of the last points I want to make is that it's an adaptation of a story that's already been told, but it kind of shows what you can do with comics. And since we've been doing the show, we've done so many great comics, from The People Inside by Ray Fox to Copra to Neurocomic, and these are all stories that were really only possible in the medium of comics. And then I read this one shortly after reading Darwin Cook's adaptation of his first adaptation of one of the Parker novels. I believe it's The Hunter, and it just goes to show that some of these master cartoonists, these really immensely talented cartoonists, have a talent of bringing you a story through words and through pictures and through pages that you actually flip and control the pacing on, that you can't really match anywhere else. And while this, for something like this, which is a very simple layout, it looks more like a children's book than it does a comic book, I think this kind of is in the same class as those. It's a story that, it shows you what's important and what right telling you, and it kind of drags you along the road of allowing you to decide for yourself what's important to you and what isn't. And I think those are some of the best comics that kind of teach you about yourself and your own sensibilities without beating you over the head with a stick of what this means, what this symbolism means. And I thought that this is one of the best stories that we've done so far. And Ryan, I want to thank you for picking it so much. Thank you for telling me about it on that first broadcast, saying, hey, go Google The Little Prince. and I found it the next day and I bought it, and I'm very happy I did. So Ryan, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy you did. That's great. That's fantastic, actually. What I ask in return is you just tell other people about it.
It's my secret. No, I'll tell others. I promise. So thank you everyone for joining us. Ryan, thank you once again. Danny, thanks for coming on, and I'll see you on Wednesday again. Chase, as always, thank you once again. And whenever we need a pinch hitter, you're the guy I'm gonna run to and beg.
My pleasure.
So next week we're gonna be talking Punk Rock Jesus by Sean Gordon Murphy. Our guest that week will be Bleeding Cool contributor Alex Wilson, and former Skybound editor and current artist Cena Grace. He's done awesome stuff like Self-Obsessed and Burn the Orphanage and Little Depressed Boy and lots of others. My cat's meowing at me, so he's telling me, hey, it's time to go, man. Once again, this is The Bleed. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next Wednesday evening. Take care.